Hi everyone, here I am with a new topic slicers and pivot in Excel. Slicers and pivot table in Excel are invaluable tools for data analysis and reporting. They provide a user friendly and efficient way to filter, analyze, and present data, enabling users to uncover insights and make informed decisions based on their findings. What are slicers and why do we need slicers in Excel? With slicers, you can easily change filter settings, instantly update the pivot table to reflect the selected criteria. This dynamic functionality allows for rapid data exploration and facilitates better decision making. Additionally, Slicer offers interactive visualization, making it easier to present data in a clear and concise manner. Let's move on to our Excel file to understand how Slicer works. We have this little complex table with so many rows and columns. When I need to narrow down the information about any particular product, country, segment, date, or any month, I have to apply multiple filters, and that can be confusing and tiring as well. To overcome this challenge, we have another option called Slicer. Let's see how to apply Slicer on this table. Select the whole range of table. Go to Insert. We see something called a slicer here. Insert the slicer. Click on Slicer. We get the result like this as no connections found. Cancel this. What do we do to get the slicer? We'll have to first do the auto formatting to this table. To make a slicer work, we need to first auto format this table. Click anywhere on the table. Go to Home. Format table as auto format to any of your preference. This table has a header. Press OK. Now we have this table in the correct format. Now click anywhere on this table. Go to Insert. Now click on Slicer. We see that all the headers of the table are mentioned here. Let's select country, segment, product, date, and month name as our slicer or a filter options. Okay. Now we have all these small boxes as slicers. Let's add all these slicers at the top of the table. For that, let me add some rows here. I'm adding some 3-4 rows. Okay. Now we have enough space above the table. Let's add the slicer one by one. Country, products, now I have all my slicers above the table. Let me remove these additional rows. Let's apply filters one by one. Let's say that we need to know the data for government segments, which is in Canada, for the product peso. So now we have applied 3 filters already using slicer, and it was very quick and easy. We have only 3 rows of data here, so let's not apply any more filters to it because it will give us just 1 or 2 rows or maybe not much rows. This is how quickly we can apply filters, and we can apply as many filters as we want, and this is very quick and the easy way to apply filters to narrow down our output. Slicer is the best way when we have multiple columns. Slicer can also work like an interactive filter. Let me clear this. I just cleared segments and country filter. I still have my product filter. We can select multiple options simultaneously. Control and press this. Now both peso and cartera is selected. Likewise, we can select multiple options. Like let me even select Montana, control and press this. Now using control and click, I can select multiple options. I can also uncheck the ones which I don't want. So now I don't have Mexico in my list. I don't have enterprise in my list. Control and click either to select or to remove. This is how the interaction works in slicers, where we can select multiple options, add, remove, and adjust to our requirement. And when we have too many columns where we have to apply filter on all the columns, this is the best way where we can select those options as slicers and work upon it just by selecting or deselecting. This will help the information to be narrowed down and we can understand the data very clearly. And the interaction of the slicers are very quick, and the multiple select options allows us to get the detailed information about multiple products with the required range. Let's clear all the filters. Next, let's learn pivot table. Why do we need pivot table for data insight? For data summarization and analysis. Pivot table provides a quick and efficient way to summarize and analyze large data sets. Pivot table is dynamic and interactive. Pivot table offers dynamic reporting capabilities that allow you to change your data analysis perception. It's flexible and time efficient. Pivot table offers immense flexibility and saves significant time when it comes to data analysis. Let's use our table and apply pivot table on that. We have a simple table like this: date, time interval, calls offered, and calls answered. This is again a data of a call center where it shows the time interval, every hour time interval, and the number of calls received for that 1 hour interval. So in a day, we have 24 entries, and for all those 24 hours, we have the calls offered data and calls answered data. And we have 30,649 rows. This is a pretty big data. As we see here, for one day we have 24 hours of data, and the date that we have is from 2017 to 2020. We almost have 3 years of data every day for 12 months, and in one day we have 24 entries. So it's too many. It's almost 30,000 rows. It's like a big data for us to analyze. Using pivot table, we can easily understand this data in a very concise and very efficient manner. Let's apply pivot table to this huge data. Select the whole table. I have selected the whole table now. Go to Insert, Pivot Table, from Table Range. Because we have a table here, so let's select it from table. So it selected the whole table range from first row to 30,649 row and from C to F column. Here it's asking where do we want this pivot table to be shown. I don't want this to be shown on the same existing worksheet because we have too much of data already on this. So let's take a new worksheet. For new worksheet, we don't have to give a location because it's going to create a new worksheet now. OK. A new worksheet is now created here. We have the pivot field here, and here we have the options to drag and drop. We just have 4 columns, so we got 4 column options here, like the way we had it for slicers. And we have drag fields between the areas below. Before we derive pivot table, we should understand what is our requirement. My requirement is I want to know the total call volume for the month. So let me go to date here and put it in the rows. As soon as you drag and drop your date field, we see multiple categories here for months, quarters, years. We can select anything that you want. Let me select months for now, and I'll put years here in the filters. I don't want the date, so I'm going to remove the date here. For values, just drag and drop calls offered and you get sum of calls offered as a default option. You can change this. If you don't want it to be in sum aggregate, you can change it to count, average, max number of calls offered, average number of calls offered, however you want as per your requirement. But for now, let me keep it as sum of calls offered because I want to know the total sum of calls for any particular month, because we have in day range and in one day we have 24 entries and it's difficult to get the sum of all those, but here in pivot we can get that quickly. Let me keep it as sum. Here I selected months in rows, filter years and values as sum of calls offered. I have not mentioned anything in columns yet. I will add that and show you. But for now we have rows and the filter and the value in the column section. As I've selected months in the row, I have the data for months and the total calls offered for this month for all years. So from 2017 to 2020, for all these months, for the month of Jan, the total calls offered, it has summed up the whole calls offered for the month of Jan for all these 3 or 4 years. This was done within few seconds. All that we have to do was drag the field and put it into the rows and values. Now instead of having filters, let me move this years to columns and let me see our output. Here I have all the data where it says 2017, 18, 19 and 20. We don't have data from July to December or 2020, so this field is blank. Looking at this table, it's clearly understandable that for Jan in the year 2017, we received this much of calls. In 2018, in the month of Jan, this was the calls offered, and for 2019 and 2020, these were the number of calls offered. And this is for all the months here. So now it's so easy for us to understand the number of calls received month-wise and year-wise. This is how pivot table helps us understand the huge data into a very understandable and concise data. Here in the column field, we have all the 4 years data and only one aggregate value as sum of calls offered. The value is only sum of calls offered for these years. If I select even the sum of calls answered here, then my table will look like this, where it has 27 data for sum of calls offered and sum of calls answered. Again, another column for 2018, 2 columns for 2018, two columns for 2019 because we have two aggregates. One is sum of calls offered and other one is calls answered. And we have another table for 2020. We don't want these many columns because first thing it's going out of the range, and second thing is it's not really concise. We want a concise and a very understandable data, and this does not give me good picture about the data. So how do we rearrange it? Let's move these years to filters. Now I have all these years in my filters, and if you want the year specific data, you can select that year, click OK, and now we have 2017 year data for sum of calls offered and sum of calls answered. 2018, and when you want all years data, this is the total 4 years data. This is how we can rearrange the pivot tables and reduce the number of columns for us to have a better understanding. Because of the filter function, the huge data is concised into a very small table, providing us the information about the whole overall 4 years data. We can even add time interval, but this makes the data look very clumsy. After applying the time interval in the row field, we have all these plus options coming up, and the year that I have selected is 2019. When you expand this, you get all these time intervals from 0 to 23, that is the 24 hours in a day. This shows that in Jan 2019 at 5 a.m. in the month of Jan 2019, these are the total number of calls received and these are the total number of calls answered. When you select all, the numbers are increased as because it's going to add all the 4 years data where the value is 5 a.m. time interval and the month is Jan, and for all the dates. This was done so quickly. If we have to do it manually, then this would have taken really long time, but this helps us to get the data instantly, where we have this data for 5 a.m. If you want to know how many calls received at 5 a.m. in the month of Jan for all the years, we have this data. And this is the time interval for all the other months as well. If you have to check the data about how many number of calls received at 10 a.m. or during the 10 a.m. interval in the month of February for all the years, and these are the data that we can find. Let me remove the time interval here. To remove, just drag and put it outside the table or the field and it just goes off. It's gone. Now we only have sum of calls offered and sum of calls answered. When you double click on the sum of calls offered or any aggregate value column, when you double click here, I'll be taken to another sheet with all this information here, where I have the data from 2017 to 2020 and the total calls offered and answered for all the dates. And I have it in a separate sheet here. Every time when you click on, let me just select 1 year data. And when you click anywhere here, when you double click here, you'll get another sheet. And this is only for 2017 data. This will show us the detailed information about the total number of calls offered. As per this table here, for the year 2017 and in the month of April, according to a pivot table, for the year 2017 and in the month of April, we received 3,48,000 plus calls, and again 3,44,000 plus calls were answered. When we double click on any of this row where it has the sum value or the aggregate value like average or maximum, any aggregate value, and we double click on that particular row, we will get another sheet with all the detailed information that's starting from 1st of April 2017 to all the days for all the time intervals. We have separate calls offered and the total value is 348953 344702. This is what we have here. So this sheet will give us the complete detailed information about the total number that we have here, just for us to cross check if the data is correct. We can try this to all the years. And now when you want to see the total number of calls offered for all the 4 years, and when you double click on this plus sign, we will be redirected to another sheet which has the total calls offered for all the 4 years for the month of September. And here we see that we have 10 lakh plus calls for September for all those years. When we double click, this is starting from 17, 18, 19. For 2020, we don't have September data, so that is the reason that's not shown here. So for 3 years, for all the time interval, and it's only for September date. And you see here, it's only September for all these 3 years. And the total calls offered, when you go to the bottom of this, to the end of the row, let's add this. Now we got 1077239106445. This is what the numbers we see here. This is the detailed information of this total values. After applying pivot table, we see these two tabs showing up. Here we have pivot table analyze tab, where we have field items and sets. This will allow us to modify, calculate, and add items. Here I have calls offered, that is the calls which came in, and the calls answered, as how many calls were received. Suppose we get 100 calls, and if we have received 90 calls for that day, 10 calls were abandoned. For me to know abandoned number of calls and add another column here in the pivot range, we have to go to pivot table analyze and click on field items and sets. This will add a new calculated column to us. Calculated field. Here you get field name. Let me mention it as total abandoned calls, and is equal to, how do we know the abandoned call rate? By calls offered minus, let me remove the 0, calls offered minus calls answered will give us the abandoned call numbers. Click OK. Here we have the total abandoned cells. We got the new calculated field here. You can recheck this. You can cross check. Is equal to calls offered minus calls answered is equal to 97772. This is the right answer. You see that the new field has now been included here, which is the total abandoned calls. This is the calculated column that we just added. You can make the changes to the way this looks. If you want to know the percentage of the difference, if you're looking for the percentage of abandoned calls, Then we can change that. Show value as percentage of grand total. You can even change the name here. Total abandoned calls is what you can mention. We got an error, so let me change it to sum of abandoned calls. Now we have the percentage of the abandoned rate. We see that the calls offered is in 11 lakh range and the calls answered was also in the same 11 lakh range. The abandoned percentage is very less, which is 4% or 4.9%. This is how we can make the changes to the values, and also we can add another calculated formula to get some more details. After applying the pivot table, we see that there are two features under pivot tool. One is pivot analyze and the other one is design. Like the way we did in auto formatting, we can even select the pivot style here. When I select this, it turns out to this shade. We can select this shade. Let us go to some more shades here and apply this. Like the way we have in our auto format, we have banded rows and banded columns option here, and we can select this banded rows, banded columns, column header and row header for formatting. As we don't have any row headers here, we can just uncheck the row headers. So let's keep the banded rows and banded columns option just the way it is. And we see something called as grand total. We can apply this to row only. In that way, we don't have in the columns. When we apply for column only, so we have column totals. We have for both rows and columns. For rows, we don't have the grand total because this is another sum total of it, and then we have an abandoned call percentage. So the total will not be taken this way. So we only have the grand total for columns. We can apply slicers on this pivot table as well. Click anywhere on the pivot table. Go to insert again and select slicer. We have all these columns, and these are the columns that we took from the main sheet. We can take the months, quarter, year, call offered, call answered. Let's have all these slicers applied. Okay. Let me make some space here. Let me put the slicers just beside the pivot table. Instead of adding it on the pivot table, I can put it beside the pivot table. Let me rearrange it. Now I have all my 5 slices arranged this way. If I want to know the call volume for the year 2017 and for quarter 1, this is the data that we have. For February, for March, individually we can check that. If you want to select the multiple selection, control click, control click, control click. Now all 4 years data is selected. If you want to know 2 months for March and February for all these years, these are the total sum of calls offered, answered and abandoned percentage. Clear this to include quarter 2. Let's select quarter 2 for all these years, or if you want only the specific year, you can select that particular year or just select 2 or 3 at a time. Instead of just going to the filter here, selecting the year, you can do it from this. This filter is only for years. If you want it to be for any specific month, you can go to the months option here. If you want the quarter data here, then you can simply select the required quarter in the slicer. This way, pivot table and the slicer can help us narrow down the information as much as we can, providing a very good insight about what is happening each and every month, year, and quarter. Now let's quickly get the highlights of this video. Pivot table provides benefits such as data summarization and analysis, dynamic and interactive reporting, as well as flexibility and time efficiency. By combining slicers and pivot table, we can quickly explore and analyze data without a need of complex formulas or manual sorting. Multiple advantages makes pivot table and slicer a go-to feature in Excel for efficient data analysis and decision making.